Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can get more information about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is dedicated to our general questions, any question you have around media or virtual production. Second hour is usually something we've decided to spend a little bit more time on. We are spending today, we'll talk about cybersecurity, how it affects our shows and our process. Tomorrow, we're talking at 8 o'clock, we'll have education. We don't actually stream that. So we'll have that, that usually we shut off and allow the teachers to speak freely. Education is 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock. We're going to have Nick Jushishin. We're going to start more discussion about Unreal Engine. And he's going to talk about he was part of the Unreal Fellowship in the spring. And he's going to talk about exactly, what he went, how he built it and how he put it together. And that's the beginning of us talking about metahumans and then coming back to Unreal over the next couple of weeks. So he'll be doing that at 10 o'clock. And at noon, we'll be cooking again with Damayanti Gajar, and she's going to we're going to be going through it. The recipe, how to buy, what to buy, how to do it is all on the link that we sent out with the email this morning. So you can get that information there. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one this morning comes from Mike Emmett in Melbourne, Australia. And Mike says, in the last year, I've been pushed by clients into running micro events on Instagram Live. Does anyone have anything to say about Instagram Live as a platform? I guess I can say at least there's a crowd there.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, there's a crowd there, but be very, very careful about the way that you do it, because if for any reason you upset anyone at Instagram, you'll completely get killed.
Go ahead, Carl.
Now, from memory, Instagram requires a phone to go onto that platform. Is that still correct?
Yeah, unless you use, there's Yellow Duck. Yeah. So Yellow Duck will go fish it out.
Yeah, Sony Xperia Pro will allow you to put any HDMI switcher.
Has anyone tried that?
Yes, well, not on the panel, but Philip Bloom has, and he's actually got a good rundown of what works. So Zoom doesn't work, but Instagram, Facebook do work.
Interesting. So that might be a whole reason to buy the phone. Yeah, because we've been doing lots of other weird setups to make that work. And so
it simply shows up as a fifth camera, the input.
And it
has four other cameras. Yeah.
Right.
So it shows up as camera number 5 as to Facebook, to YouTube, and to Instagram, but to Zoom and to Skype, no go.
And what about to TikTok? Did he talk about that?
Didn't talk about, I have to check the video, but I remember him talking about Facebook and Instagram, though, but I can't remember TikTok.
Yeah. Jonas?
Why do you need it to TikTok? TikTok has RTMP input.
Does it? I think you need to be a certain size to get RTMP input. I didn't think that anybody could do live.
You get it pretty fast after you reach the 1,000 that you need to go live.
Got it. There you go. All right, next question.
Next question comes to us from Rupert McRae here in the panel. And Rupert's in Dallas, Texas, and says, Zoom yesterday announced its new user community forum. Users can earn badges and reputation levels for things like receiving likes and providing solutions. There is also a leaderboards element. Should office hours be represented in that community?
Sure. Go ahead, John.
I nominate Rupert.
Yeah, Rupert will be our envoy to Zoom to Zoom community. Yeah, I have a kind of a back and forth with badges. so I think that they work kind of, and we may do something that does something like that someday, but it's yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. Next question.
Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn is up next, and he says, hi, Alex, any update on the monoprice 8x8 matrix by chance?
It's all wired up. I just haven't turned it on yet. So I finally got the cables from the stuff wired up to where it needs to go. And I started plugging them in, and I was like, now I have to find the manual that I'd set down somewhere or go online and figure out what, how to route it, because nothing was coming out. So, but it's all got things going in and out of it now, slowly but surely moving through that process. Anyway, but I'll just keep asking. It's getting closer to the surface now. Next question.
Aaron Husledge in Durham, North Carolina, and on the panel says, can the panel recommend some good in-ear monitors with custom molded earpiece?
Do you have a price range that you're trying to hit? We can recommend lots of things.
Like 500-ish at the most.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
You can get into Edemonic Research's serious ones for around there if you shop carefully. So they do custom ear molds. You have to go into your audiologist and get them to do the molds, but those are pretty top end.
Go ahead, Jason.
The Shure, I want to say it's the 800. It's a quad driver, and I'm not sure if they're actually available anymore, but they were around $500. And the trick is you need to spend an extra $100 in order to get custom molds. But the nice thing about this particular mold is that it works on a lot of things.
Go ahead, Noah.
I have some Ultimate ears. I'm not sure if they're the same as like in-ear monitors. Are you talking like for on camera or just monitoring in general?
Yeah, just monitoring in general. Some on camera, but yeah, mostly monitoring.
Yeah, Ultimate Ears has a really good lineup, and if you talk to a sales rep, they'll give you about $100 discount. So I'll send you something in Discord.
And Noah, you're coming in a little hot.
Thank
you. Next question.
Moving on. This comes from Ted Claudio in Quezon City, the Philippines. And he says, if you have 2 to 3 simultaneous remote RTMP feeds, what's the best value for money way to receive them at the home base and then feed them into an ATEM Extreme ISO?
Go ahead, Jonas.
If you want to tinker a little bit, you can buy 3 Raspberry Pis, and Aaron Parecki did a great video on how to create your own streaming bridge. Or if the other RTMP feeds are also ATEM Minis, you can use the original Blackmagic design streaming bridge. There are also you can also put Nimble server on the Raspberry Pi. If you need to receive SRT or anything else, then you should be pretty much covered.
That's perfect answer. Next question.
Jonas Dattel, who is just speaking from in Germany, says, does it make sense for a playout system to have an optional limiter and normalizer to deal with audio?
Go ahead, Carl.
Limiter would be good as long as it's coded well. Normalizer, it's a bit tricky because you don't know what it's going to do at the end. But a limiter, like a brick wall limiter, just to make sure people don't go way over the edge, that's not a bad idea.
I think a limiter is great. I think that it would be great to, I mean, there are some apps that we've had that will analyze, analyze content beforehand, just scan through it and set levels, for every clip. So it'll look at all the clips and set the levels to a certain max. And we definitely had processes that will do that. Being able to, one thing that is useful is being able to set the volume for every clip ahead of time, so that's something that, that was for like, Playback Pro, that was a big thing. People would go in and set levels for each clip well in advance to make sure it's exactly the level that we want. So at least manual, if not analyzing it and then setting it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you said exactly what I was going to say. With my playback software, if you preset the level and then it saves a sidecar file for that, every single file that you've changed the level for, and it automatically loads that level in when you load the file.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, if you were to have one knob on the limiter, just incredibly simple, I would say, wherever the brick wall is, just do not let anything pass past that. But yeah.
I mean, the tricky part is what you do when it gets there.
Right.
Like it's how you set that knee, or how you, when a limiter things can flatten out really in not a nice way, or they can be, a lot of times you can start compressing at one level and have it hit a wall at another. So hard limiters are good, but it's how it gets there, and I think that's harder to do digitally than analog. Analog limiters tend to have that. Go ahead, Jonas.
So you would much rather have the complete control over a compressor?
We're control freaks here, so having a compressor that you get to set. I mean, you could do it. You could do it for most people. So if they just set the limiter at 3. You can do everything in the back end that says, if you set it to -3, I'm going to start compressing it at -6, but I'm going to have something else at -3 that is a 10-to-1 or 20-1 compression at -3, but I might have a 3-to-1 compression that starts kicking in, or at -6 or something, to kind of level that off a little bit. And that's a very simplistic way to think about it, but that type of thing to kind of create a knee that's there, that would be, I think, useful. Next question.
Tyler Roberts in Chambersburg says, the link to episode on Olympics videos doesn't work on Office Hours Global. What's going on?
I think that it should be back up, unless we get hit with something else. So we played some footage from the Olympics, and the Olympics committee or an NBC or somebody did what they do on YouTube, which is they didn't flag it. They didn't strike it. It wasn't a strike, but it was a we definitely got a do not play until we fix
got an
it.
Oopsie.
The cool thing about YouTube though is you can select those and just hit delete, and it'll delete that out of the video and then put it back up. We thought it was already processed. I mean, we did that yesterday, so hopefully it'll process sometime today. But we've already kind of gone through the process. But it's because I showed it full screen. I have to admit, I had planned to show them all half screen. When I lost power and everything reset, I just didn't think about it again, and so I didn't go through the steps that I had gone through the first time. Next question.
Jonas Dutel here in the panel is back with, can Resolve export multiple channels of audio to an MP4 file?
Go ahead, Carl.
So I've taken a look at the settings. It looks like it's a bit tricky with MP4, but Subler is, Handbrake, but Subler is the one that does it. Subler is a muxing app for I'll put the link in there, but if you've got Subler, then you can put in as many audio tracks as MP4. I think it doesn't matter because it's just a wrapper for all these, and you can select them in VLC or whatever.
I mean, I know that Resolve is capable of doing lots of tracks. I haven't done it with MP4, but with ProRes, I think the most we put out in a ProRes file is 37 tracks, so it's definitely doable. Next question.
The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn is in with, hey guys, what are your thoughts on using TVs instead of monitors in production?
Go ahead, Carl.
So I can tell you that some of the higher end TVs, so your Sony 9 series, your Samsung 9 series, avoid OLEDs. Don't go down that road, but just the higher end LEDs have professional monitors in them. That's what you're paying for. There's going to be large. Very famously, I think Samsung just announced a 48-inch, a very small OLED. So that one can be probably put into production, but OLEDs are not going to be the final color that everyone sees. So not good for mastering.
Go ahead, Jason.
I would say don't use them for color monitoring, and no matter what you do, color calibrate them anyway, just because they're going to get weird no matter what. And other than that, yeah, everything Jonas said.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm surprised how successful I've been in the last maybe 10 years with using that as a client monitor, not anything I'm using for actual coloring or assessment, but in the same way that we used to use inexpensive near field audio monitors on a bridge and a recording thing to say, what would it sound like somebody's car or something like that. Having a regular TV, if you can defeat all of its auto processing, because things like Sony TVs tend to pump up color and things like that, and they just look sometimes better than the actual signal. And you want to avoid that like the plague, but just to have a regular TV and to say, what's it going to look like when it hits there? Is it going to do something weird with a bezel or something? That's not a bad idea. I've always done that.
Go ahead, Aaron, and then Courtney.
The real issue you'll run into, I think, is lifetime. Commercial displays tend to have better electronic components to be long-lived if they're on all the time, whereas TVs, they don't expect to be on all the time. So their LEDs wear out, et cetera, et cetera. It's, yeah.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And if it has a game mode, turn that on, because what that'll do is remove the latency of the processing in the scaler of the TV, and so it'll not apply its smoothing and its, all of its little tricks it uses to make the image look better, and its interpolation. It'll turn all that off. And of course, it'll be faster and stay in sync with your live audio in the room.
I did not know that. I was always like, why is there a gaming mode? Like it didn't even, game mode was like this random mode that TV. So that's go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I actually have a 42-inch television I use for my primary monitor, and what Courtney just said made a huge difference when you're using a keyboard and mouse, and you're like, why is there a lag? And yeah, that's really great.
That's very good. Yeah, we use the probably the one that we use the most is the 55-inch Samsung. I don't know how we bought many, many of those TVs, and then for backgrounds for people, we've often used 70-inch or up, 70, 75, 80-inch mixture of Vizios and Sharps. But, that's, for backgrounds for that, the 55s turned out to be the right thing for us for a lot of, I've seen a bunch of big monitors. And so we have a lot of them, and they're like $500 each. So they weren't particularly expensive at the time. Go ahead, Jason.
How far away from a monitor that size would you have to be for the background to not be weird?
For Moray, that I think that's a technical term for weird. as having the Moray. I typically we're about 2 to 3 feet in front of the person, but we shoot for. I mean, you can't. So the math of putting that screen behind somebody is also how far away the camera is to frame it. So you have to put as the screen goes back this way, the camera has to go back the other way so that you get a long. You're basically compressing the shot to stay inside the screen. So that's the kind of game you have to play, with that. But yeah, 3 or 4 feet, 2 or 3 feet minimum, 3 or 4 feet is what we shot for. Because as we move further away, the camera is like going twice as far back as the monitor goes the other direction. So you have to you either need that or a really big room. When we did, we had a whole wall green for the early Mac breaks, and the camera was 25 feet away. Like just really long shot to get the wall in to where we needed it. Next question.
Ted Claudio in Quezon City in the Philippines is again back with, if you have a Zoom Pro account, what's the best way to get at least 720p HD video feeds aside from screen sharing? Will getting a Zoom Room add-on guarantee HD or FHD feeds for all the participants?
Go ahead, David.
You can ask Zoom to bump up the quality of your meetings, or you could just get yourself a Facebook portal, which will automatically bump up the quality of your meetings also.
Look at that. He's keying it right over. That's so nice. All right, go, Jonas. Show off.
Also, there is no guarantee that you get it. The only thing it does, it enables people to send 720p. People do need to enable HD in their settings, and they have to be like on a good internet. Otherwise, Zoom will bring them down, and even have a camera that is able to send HD. So there's no guarantee.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, on the back of what Jonas said, I'll put in the chat in Mukana the direct link. The host at very minimum has to have these settings, and yeah, there's no guarantee that it's absolutely going to work every time. It really has to do with computing and bandwidth.
And now, David, I have a question for you. What are you using to key that over? What software?
I've got Keynote with a green background that's coming in as a separate camera, and then overlaid in eCam.
Yeah, looks good. Looks good. Next question.
John Merrill in Phoenix, Arizona is next. I have a church group of about 15 that meets in a room that's about 20 by 20 and wants to have a hybrid meeting with Zoom. It needs to be fairly simple. Any suggestions for equipment and setup? They have wired and wireless internet connections available.
No one.
I have a similar setup. Not as many people. I use it's right in front of me, an H5 to just capture the room. It's not going to be perfect, but it's kind of an ambient mic. And then as far as the camera goes, it depends on how much you want to throw at it. I use an M1 MacBook Air, and that quality is pretty solid, but definitely wired internet.
Go ahead, David.
I might suggest. It's not the best quality, but I might suggest an OWL camera. If it's just a meeting, these are fantastic for hybrid scenarios. It's got a 360 camera on top. It plugs right in via USB. They're $9.99. If you drop me a link in Discord, I can get you about $150 off for a nonprofit discount.
That's great. I haven't played with the OWL. You've used it for these kinds of meetings?
I have. Yeah, we used it for a few board meetings here. And like I said, what happens is it basically takes a 360 shot. You get a strip of that on top, and then it will auto focus on whoever's making the most noise. It'll also 2-up or 3-up if you've got multiple people speaking at the same time. It's a nice little toy.
Yep. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, Zoom has some options as what they're calling hardware as a service, and what they are is D10 and Rally and some of these systems that have all in one, where it's the monitor, the camera, the microphones. Our local YMCA just got the Rally one, and I want to say it went all the way up to about $5,000 with 2 mics, and you have the ability to plug in 7. So they're like these little beam-forming mics, and I think that's going to be your biggest challenge is with that many people, 15 people, you want to get mics in front of them or nearby 2 or 3 people. So yeah, I take a look at Logitech Rally.
Yeah, one of the things that we did, and it wasn't quite as many as 20, so that, or 15, it was like 10, is that we had people and we put them in a U around, well, actually almost a whole circle around the camera, and put the camera in the center, but it was a PTZ camera. And basically what we were able to do is program positions for the cameras so that rather than them being stacked up from the camera's perspective, the camera could do a one-on to everybody. Then we put monitors around, face basically parallel to the tables that they went around. So they were looking, a lot of times if they wanted to look online, they look right at this little 10-inch monitor that would see the far end, and they would see them, and so that their eye lines are actually pretty good. They'd look at each other if they were looking at each other. There was a little bit of an issue where we had to kind of play with it because we tried to set it up so that no one was looking through the camera at somebody else, which was a little bit of a, where you put it looked a little odd on the tables. But we created kind of gaps for the people that are in the middle so that they wouldn't look through the camera. They could see everybody and they could see the camera to talk to, but the camera itself, this little rig, this little sat down in the center, kind of made it so that everybody had a face on connection. I think that with the right room, you could put as many people as you want. 15 in 20 feet could be hard to do what I'm talking about, but it's just something to think about as kind of an in the round, and it puts the people in the round, and the 360 would work as well. This one was a higher resolution, so it would be hard to do what we were doing at 1080p. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, just to add on to that, because you talked about the size of the room, one of the interesting things about the Owl is that you can actually sort of daisy chain them, as it were. You can get a second one, connect them together, they'll work together, and they will. So if you have a longer room as opposed to a more square room, because the distance for the mic is about 12 feet.
Interesting. That's a really interesting product. Next question.
And cute too. Kelsey Malloy in Philadelphia is up next. I've installed MixPre with NoisAssist and a Heil PR40 to fix our room noise. Thank you. Now we're struggling with sibilance. What do you recommend to fix that for both Apple and PC?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Move the mic away from your mouth, and don't talk straight into it. Those are the easiest ways to do it, but you can, route it through a de-esser or something like that if you really need to.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'd say a de-esser, or you can make your own de-esser with a very tightly, with a notch filter, with basically a notch compressor at a very specific EQ.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, the MixPre is perfect. It just doesn't have any filtering in it to do some of those minor things. And so this is where you may end up with some kind of software filtering as well, in your computer. So this would be where you might add a audio hijack on the Mac or a PC, somewhere where you can add some filtering to it, on the way through. Go ahead, Bill.
And if you can get the software, particularly if you can get to one of the NLEs, a lot of them will have something called a channel EQ, and the ability to throw up a waveform of your voice as you're talking. And you can actually see some things like sibilance popping up out of the mix as a spike. If you can see that, you'll know where it is in the bandwidth, and what Jason was talking about in terms of doing a very tight channel EQ notch and bringing that down is one way to figure out what's going on and try to help fix it.
Next question.
Moving on to Juan C. Robles in Mexico, and Juan says, Apple public betas just announced any adventurous in the panel that will be testing Monterey, the new operating system.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I'm using it right now.
How's your experience?
It's been really stable so far. I've used it for 2 betas now, because I've been on the AT betas. It's been great. Safari's weird, like the new UI is weird, but most of it I really like. The focus mode is really cool.
Jason?
I always end up having 1 or 2 computers that I'm playing around with various versions, the developer beta, the public beta. It is not ready for prime time. Do not knock on this, and do not put it on a production computer, one that you're relying on. Other than that, it's pretty good.
What are the specific issues that you're having?
When you really challenge it, it seems to just get weird and like fall apart in ways that you wouldn't expect. That's the best way I could describe it. I don't have a specific use case because I haven't really nailed it down. Like, there's exactly where it happens.
I have a Mac Mini that just showed up and another one coming, so that I can test photogrammetry. so specifically just a bunch of photogrammetry tests that with using the new Monterey libraries. So I'm pretty excited about that. So we'll definitely, if you ask in a week, maybe a week and a half, I'll have some opinions about it, because I've got piles and piles of photos of objects and stuff from years of work, and I'm just going to start shoveling things into it to see how it comes out. Go ahead, Aaron.
One thing I didn't mention, so I'm running on an M1 Mini with 8 gig of RAM. I edited a 4K video yesterday. I've really been pounding it, and it's never had a hard time with it.
Yeah, the reason I'm getting a 16 is because the recommendations for the photogrammetry is 16. So that's
need more memory. Yeah.
So I just was like, okay, I'll get one to test that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, one of the machines that I'm running it on is a 16. And I'll say, if you are using only Apple apps, it seems pretty solid. Get into Photoshop, get into the Adobe suite. That's when it gets goofy.
I have to admit that
one could say it's always goofy with Adobe software.
Well, I have to admit I have a computer with Photoshop, so that when clients send me things in Photoshop, I can convert them to what I need and export the stuff out. That's usually that's most of my work with Photoshop at the moment. Next question.
John Agapitos, it looks like, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, in Sydney, Australia, says, I would like to relocate my 2 Promise R8 Thuderbolt 2 drives about 8 meters away from my iMac Pro. What solutions are available for that?
Go ahead, Carl.
There's only one, made by Corning themselves. That's the optical Thunderbolt cables. So these are a godsend. This is the Thunderbolt 1 and 2. It doesn't really matter because it's the same speed for either protocol. But yeah, this is it. And they're the only company that makes them, I believe.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, what Carl said. And if somebody else makes it, don't even bother. Get it. And that's really, Guy's got his hand up. Oh, man. Okay. What do you got, Guy?
No, I'm just saying that I bought those and they're super fragile. I had to throw some away because they got damaged. So be super careful when running them, because any little hit and they're gone. And they're pricey. Throwing away $300 in the garbage is not fun.
Yeah. Aaron?
The theoretical limitation is 100 feet of copper, but I don't know that anybody makes a cable that, or ever did make a cable that long. So
it was this thick. Right, next
exactly.
question.
Filled with unobtainium.
Yeah.
Looked like one of those things coming off Hoover Dam.
It's a piece of core that's this big, and then it has gold that's this thick, and then it's filled with a platinum core. So all right.
And it can handle an actual Thunderbolt.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Kelsey Malloy in Philadelphia is up next. And Kelsey says, I have recently implemented the Blackmagic HyperDeck Studio Mini, but I've had trouble with playback. It plays back as wacky rainbow static. Ooh, that sounds fun. I played around with my video export and HyperDeck codec settings. Anyone have suggestions for solving this issue?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So you'll have to export generally from Resolve, but you can export from other things in ProRes. That's it. So your playback will be ProRes only. So even though it says it can record MP4 in the unit, only the stuff that's recorded in the unit can be played back at MP4. So ProRes will be the one you want to go to.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, everything that Carl said. And just to be sure that you don't have some weird lemon, record, 10 seconds of video and then just loop it, play it back, just to be dead sure that nothing's wrong with the unit.
Go ahead, Guy.
And if you want to play MP4s, I found using a Raspberry Pi for $99, building that out, it might take you, maybe 20, 30 minutes to build one, but then you got a deck that can play MP4s and you can do it from any browser on your network. And that's pretty slick with the PlayOutB software that UNS makes.
And the customer service is excellent. All right, especially for us. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next, and he asks, if the Zoom meeting timeout is somewhere between 24 and 48 hours, could ZoomOSC be used to automatically restart or refresh a meeting before it closes and times out to keep true 24/7 meetings going?
Go ahead, Jason.
I can't speak for ZoomOSC, but AppleScript can do it no problem.
Yeah, we don't even know if that limitation's there anymore. Like we just haven't tested it or pushed it out. We've heard that people have left them on for days, so we're not sure if there is a limitation. Go ahead, David.
So us Jews, we have 3-day holidays when people don't like to use technology. And so what we needed to do is have a Zoom meeting that could perpetually be on for 72 hours. And so one of the local rabbis actually contacted Zoom, and they allowed us to keep a Zoom meeting going for 72 hours straight. So maybe just ask.
What about 11 days? Don't you have some that are longer? You got to help us with this problem by just keep requesting longer.
We have long holidays, but the technology limitations are just 3 days at max.
Okay. All right.
That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah,
All
awesome.
of Hanukkah, man.
So awesome. Next question.
Rose Brand in New York City. Has anyone connected a webcam to an ATEM Mini as a second camera? If so, what did you use to connect it, and how was the quality?
I think it's Ross Brand. Rose Brand. I have to admit, I look at Ross's name every single time, and I think Rose Brand, because a lot of us buy a lot of stuff from Rose Brand, and so it's a source. So I keep on. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Carl, and then Jason.
So as far as two common webcams, they require HDMI out. So one would be the Huddle Cam, which a lot of people use, and then the Thor. So the Thor is a little bit more features, but yeah, these two cameras that you probably want to look at.
Go ahead, Jason.
The only webcams that you can plug into an ATEM are not actually webcams. They're webcams with HDMI out, which is not a webcam. So I wouldn't go there. You can do it for so much less that it's just not worth it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I was using, up until I got the Carl recommended Canon, I was using the MCOS camera, which has both HDMI and USB out and works as a webcam, and takes C-type lenses, so you can put your own lens on it.
I did, if everyone's wondering, I did get the Dell, the new Dell camera, which I will be probably sending back. I was excited. I will say that the industrial design on the new Dell camera is stunningly good, like stunningly. Like, I just wish someone else would just take that apart. I'll show it when I'm back, and if someone asks the question next week after Wednesday, I'll show it to you. But it's got a 1/4-20 and a mount, and they both just kind of pop in with magnets, and it's like a beautiful little setup, and it's got a little cap on it that you can pop on, and everything about it around it is designed impeccably except for the sensor. So I mean, it was like
except for the one part you actually bought it.
The one part that you bought it for is like, you're like, oh, and it's like, so it appears that what's interesting about it is that the noise comes out when you go into lower gain levels. So I don't even know how that's even possible. When you go to lower gain structures, you see fixed noise behind you that you don't see, and I've like never seen that behavior before. So another one for me, another one bites the dust. When I was putting it together, I was like, oh, this is it. This is going to replace the Logitech. And then I turned it on, and then I was like, oh, no, maybe not. I played with it for a while, trying to figure out what I was doing. Gets a little better when it's in lower light environments, but not great. Yeah, Jason.
I mean, along those lines, I'm just trying to rack my brains thinking how you could end up with an inverse, of what normally you get with noise. Like, if lighting goes up, how does noise go up? And I'm thinking, like, maybe they optimized for that.
No,
like
they optimized for lower
processor?
light. I think they optimized for lower light, but I was very confused.
Native ISO, maybe. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's really odd. The native ISO is very high, and then so the grain comes out when it's low, but it just seemed like a crazy thing for them to do. Next question.
Interesting. There's hope, Alex, because what if they can source better chips, and they've got a great solution? That'd be interesting. Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, is next. With the U.S. Department of Agriculture has awarded $167 million in the second round of funding for rural broadband. Could, in the end, rural areas end up with multiple choices for high-quality connectivity and with less congested networks?
Go ahead, Jason.
I would be delighted if rural areas could just have one decent solution for high-speed internet. I am optimistic, but slightly cynically optimistic.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I mean, they're not duplicating funding, so it's not going to happen from this or the FCC. Well, it could be that other competition shows up if there's a lot of money to be made, but I doubt that.
And I say this, I've come to this conclusion over a very long period of time, and begrudgingly think that it's time for our internet to be a utility. It is more important to us than phones ever were. It's more important to some people than their electricity. It is intrinsic to people's welfare, their welfare. It's intrinsic to their good. It is, and the only reason we're not doing that is because of lobbyists. I mean, I don't touch on politics very often, but we're talking about like, how do we have Apple have to break up its store instead of the really useful questions, which is how do we have good internet? And this is all just, this is a classic case of our representatives letting us down, and doing it for money. So it's just a lot of money that's pushing against it. All these companies have spent a lot of money on their 5G and on their other things and everything else, and they lobby billions of dollars to keep us from having what we need. And it's gotten to a point. And I don't usually get into this very much, and I don't usually talk about this stuff, but it's a huge problem. We need to basically charge everybody for it, do exactly what we did for phone. Rural gets, and we should stop talking about broadband. Like the broadband numbers that the FCC is throwing out are pathetic. It's an embarrassment that they would, it's an embarrassment that they open their mouth, and said that, just because what it showed us is that that the head of the FCC doesn't know what they're talking about. Like that's what it told us, is that they're completely clueless. We need to be talking about fiber to the home. Fiber to the home is to every home. Like somebody needs to run on fiber to the home, because that means it can be 1 gig, then it can be 10 gig, then it can be 40 gig. It just has to be glass all the way to the home, and we could do this. We're spending trillions of money that we're mostly going to probably waste. We could spend trillions on doing this and have it go to everyone, and it would do more for this country than any other infrastructure costs that we spent. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, knowing how politics works in America, how this will probably be handled is they'll provide a stipend or a tax rebate to any rural people who apply for it, and provide them with a Starlink account. And that's what's going to happen, because the cost of rolling out the infrastructure for just those rural areas,
but that was the same,
and the build out time is going to be years to do that, and that's going to proceed through several.
It doesn't get better the longer you wait.
Right, and the other thing though is that it's what we did for phones, it's what we did for electricity, it's what we've done this before. Like we've run it out to every house in the United States. And so, or almost every house in the United States, we know how to do this, and the reason we're not doing it is not because we can't, it's because we won't. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, not only do we know how to do this, we knew how to do this roughly 100 years ago when the Rural Electrification Bill did it as part of the New Deal. Like this is a very well-known thing. And despite what ISPs want us to think, once you have the infrastructure, which is really all that's necessary, the difference between 15 up and 150 up is negligible. It's just infrastructure.
The government of Rwanda, what they did is they just ran fiber to all the major locations. So all the major cities, I mean, every major city in Rwanda has fiber running to it, and that's owned by the government. And then they let the service providers do the last mile. So all the cell companies and everything else, they get to do service, they get to do quality of, your experience, and they sell it to you and everything else. But the backbone was rolled out as a government program because there was no investment for it. They couldn't find someone to invest in it. And they were like, okay, we're going to set us up for the next little bit of time. Go ahead, Aaron.
I think, Carl, it's time to talk about NBN. How that's working.
So NBN, so I have NBN like literally right here. The way NBN works is essentially we chose as taxpayers that the government would create a company or an authority that would via legislation mean that NBN that a certain amount has a certain amount of speed, which we don't really care about speed so much. It's like 100 meg, I think, minimum to everyone. And the reason why the Australian government got in touch with Starlink's people really quickly was because they were like maybe 0.5 or 1% of people out in rural Australia who NBN didn't make sense to. NBN's, by the way, fiber to the door. So we're putting in Starlink. Well, the government is paying for Starlink receivers to go into these remote areas under the NBN plan. So us taxpayers are going to be paying for these remote Starlinks out there. But that's what we want. We want everyone to have the same access to internet in the country, no matter where you are. And this is why Australia's kind of speeding up the Starlink rollout.
Yeah, and the big rollout. And I mean, there was some tax advantages, but one of the big reasons that Ireland exploded was because it had horrible infrastructure, and then it upgraded at the end of the 80s at the right time and suddenly had great infrastructure, and that made a huge difference for the country. So it's a huge accelerator for economic growth, and it's super important for rural and non-urban locations and states, because they are able to people are able to move there. You know, I don't know. I mean, Emily in our group, you know, talked about one of the ways she was looking at moving was she needed to know that there was going to be good bandwidth, you know, and so having good bandwidth and access to it. And then the cheapest thing that we can do is just create massive fines for the lack of access to pole access. Pole access is everything. Like if we just say you're going to pay $100,000 a day per pole after 30 days, this would most of us, not all the rural, but in the cities and suburbs, if AT&T had to pay $100,000 a pole for any day over 30 days that they haven't provided access to the pole, we wouldn't have any problem with bandwidth because, you know, they'd have plenty of competition. Next question.
Ross Brand, I got it right this time, in New York City, says, does NoisAssist work with the first generation of MixPre?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it does not. It does not have those upgraded chips. So you'll want to get the MixPre 2, and those ones do.
Next question.
They're hard to find right now, but I saved 4 of them. Yeah, they're all gone, but I saved 4 of them for office hours, folks. So if you call in, they're not going to be available on the website, but I have some. If somebody really needs one, I saved some.
Nice.
I think I know an actress that needs one really quickly. So hold one for a day. Let me do that. Okay,
that's awesome, Guy. Thanks.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, Kelsey, you mentioned using a MixPre with NoisAssist in a fixed installation. Do you take any steps to lock the configuration of the MixPre to avoid unauthorized changes?
I don't know. I don't think we've ever
do
locked
that,
them. I didn't know we could lock it out. Yeah, I don't know of a way to lock a MixPre. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I don't know. Maybe you could just turn off Bluetooth, and then the only way to control it would go away.
I mean, I wonder if something's there. The MixPre that I grabbed is a different one than I normally have, and I have a NoisAssist installed on it, but I can't access it. Like I can't turn it on, and so I haven't figured out exactly. So there is something in there. Go ahead, Chris.
Is it possibly turned on? Excuse me. Assigned to a different channel?
No, it's not. It's not assigned to any. Like it won't let me assign anything. Like I can see that it exists in the device. I might have to just reset it. Go ahead, Courtney.
And I just want to let you know there is a new firmware update that came out yesterday for all the MixPre 3 series, so 7.14, I think. So
maybe I'll just update it and see what happens.
It gives you a 10 dB pad, I think, which is all of you dynamic mic users will never use.
Next question.
TJ Worrell in Minneapolis has our next question. He says, will the base M1 Mac Mini, the 256 gigabyte SSD, 8 gig of memory, work as a Zoom screen scrape machine, or do you need the larger SSD and or 16 gigabytes of RAM? He'll be using the pluggable HDMI adapters that Andy Carluccio recommended.
You should be able to screen scrape. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the answer is all day, every day. No problem.
There you go. Next question.
Manolo Lorenzo in the United Kingdom says, what is the best way to connect a clean feed from the Canon 5D Mark II into an ATEM Mini, for example, without overlay information, including the square in the middle of the screen?
Go ahead, Carl.
The Mark II from memory didn't have a very clean out, but the square in the middle, that's simply autofocus. So go to your lens, physical lens, and flick the switch that goes from auto to manual. Flick it to manual, that box will go away. I think they did do a firmware update for the Mark II to give you a clean feed, but that box will never go away until you actually make the lens into manual. So MF, switch it to MF on the actual physical lens. That's the only way to get that box to disappear.
Good, Jason.
Yeah, and as far as the rest of it is concerned, it's been a while since I've had to do it on a Mark II, but Magic Lantern, which I'll put a link in Mukana for, is your easiest, fastest way to do it. And the Mark II is one of the most well understood camera infrastructures of all of the Magic Lanterns. It's also not permanent. So if you're worried about messing it up, don't worry. It's relatively easy to undo unless anyone has any horror stories. But for the most part, the 5D Mark II is pretty clean.
Next question.
The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York is back with morning, guys. Can you recommend an external DVD add-on for a Mac Mini? Our 2010 iMac with DVD player just died.
Go ahead, Carl.
So this is the one I own. It'll do the BDX, you know, the crazy 128 gig discs. This pretty much, it's rock solid. It's bus powered. It'll go into USB-A, which is what you're going to have on yours. So this, without a doubt, is probably one of the best you can get, and it just works forever.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Apple makes a DVD or a disc player that's USB that attaches to any Mac that you can adapt to regular USB-A, and it plays just fine. I use mine all the time for old legacy stuff that I want to pull off.
Go, Jason.
Wow, both great answers, and I haven't used both. I would say if you're going to be moving it around a fair bit, Bill's is, you know, it's a much solider build. The one that comes from Apple has an all aluminum top, but the one that Carl recommends, it's less solid for the build, but oh boy, is it fast.
It's black anodized aluminum.
Oh,
so
really?
Metal. Yeah,
oh, that must be a completely different one than the one I have. Yeah.
It's slick. Yeah, it's all, the top's aluminum and the bottom's aluminum.
I have to admit, I actually, this is a little bit of a side thing. I actually got a new Blu-ray player for my house because the handful of movies that I have that you can't find on screen, Kundun you can't evidently get, and Henry V and a couple other ones. And so watching them, I was like, oh, I remember when I could watch video without macro blocking. like it was nice to see actually high quality video was nice. Go ahead, Courtney.
And I might warn you that if you're going to burn any DVDs with those devices, which you can, you might need a Y connector that plugs into 2 USB ports for power, because they'll consume too much power depending on.
Point on that, Apple's will absolutely, if you connect it directly into a Mac, there's this neat little USB hack that they always turn on eventually that will allow it to draw more voltage.
And this one comes with that Y cable, Courtney, so you're right.
Yeah, they do come with the Y cable. Don't lose the Y cable.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is the USB super drive for $80.
There you go.
Easy peasy.
Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California said, how does anyone use EQ in the ATEM Mini's compressor and so forth?
Go ahead, Carl.
It works quite well. You want it embed via HDMI first. So get it in that way. But once you're in there, they're actually quite powerful as far as built in. So the EQ and compressor, they're as good as anything I've got elsewhere in a digital form.
Yeah. Jason?
In practice, I tend to use a high pass filter, just to get rid of the low end rumble. Other than that, it is, Carl's right, it is very precise. So, use it any way that you would typically use it, an EQ.
Yeah, I find that with all the ATEMs, the interfaces to them, how the audio gets into the ATEMs and the routing is goofy. The actual processing is as good as anything else that we've seen. Like it's really, really good. If they just fixed the inputs and they fixed how it routes, like Maddie being like not equal on the way in and out and so on and so forth, they'd actually have a really good system. Next question.
Kelsey Malloy in Philadelphia asks, does the quality of an XLR cable make a big difference in sound quality? And if so, what cable do you recommend within reason?
Go ahead, Carl.
So name brands actually do count here a little bit. So I personally like to use Hoser. Hoser make 2 series, one where you can unscrew the actual XLR bit and you can actually see the soldering, and ones where you can't. The ones where you can't are kind of good for patch cables where you're never going to touch them again. If it's a mic cable that's going to be unplugged every day, then the ones where you can actually take off the base of the XLR plug and resolder it yourself, those ones are usually very high quality. And you can actually open it up and take a look at it and see how high quality it is when you get it anyway. But I personally like the Hoser. I'll put a link in Meccano.
For mission critical stuff, and I know this will sound very, if we're not making it ourselves, we get Mogami. Mogami cables, they are absurdly expensive, but we've used them for a decade. Like it's, you buy them and you use them for hundreds and hundreds of shows and they work. We don't usually buy the long ones just because we're afraid they're going to get cut, but for all of our like 20 feet and under, for most of our stuff would be Mogami. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I recommend the Canary Star Quad is the most immune to 60 hertz and low, inductive pickup if you're running long mic cables, and Neutrik connectors on either end.
And I was going to say, when we make them, that's exactly what we use is Star Quad with Neutrik connectors. Go ahead, Bill.
For robustness and reliability, there is definitely a difference, but he asked about sound quality, and I'm going to say no. There's no sound quality.
There is.
Oh yeah.
There
Oh
is.
yeah.
There
Yeah,
is.
like Star Quad is like.
If anybody can do a test and find different cables making a difference in my voiceover work or something like that, I will.
At your
I will
home,
buy you dinner.
At your home, it won't. It might not make a difference.
But that's what these guys are using it for.
But in a production environment, there's a huge difference in a production environment between it, because it's how much noise it picks up, and even in a balanced environment, you're going to have more noise in the lower quality cables. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that StarQuad is actually a different way of routing. It is adding a separate cable, and it's like a humbucking cable. So, if you're running power, it will absolutely kill the noise, and it's a really, really great investment.
Yeah, Carl, you were going to say?
Yeah, so
you muted yourself again.
So yeah, what I was going to say is there is with the XLR cables, it's length. So every wire you put into an audio chain, especially the analog part of an audio chain, is a resistor. It's an attenuator, and it is so because it's in a resistor and attenuator, the attenuation part can actually pick up hum. And this is where the more expensive cables like Mogami, they really pay attention to that as far as how they run those cables. So you can do probably 200, 300, 400 feet, and it'll be just like you're running 3 feet for those cables.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Don't run long cables of analog cable.
We try not to. I mean, I have to admit that I don't think we run. I haven't run more than 50 feet of analog in a long time. We generally switch to Dante pretty quickly. We just figure out how we're going to do that if we're going to do it. We just don't like long runs because it just causes trouble. Next question.
Larry Engelhardt in Chicago says, I have a Canon XA20 video cam with the same settings, trying to show via a Roland V1 HD mixer. Tested HDMI outs, both work on a monitor. Only one will work with any Roland. Any ideas as to why?
Go ahead, Carl.
So first thing with Canon camcorders, and if you're seeing this, is go to settings, factory reset all. Start there. Then you want to make sure you actually go into HDMI settings. They are default to auto. So the HDMI output is designed to go to a TV and not to a production system, the SDI version of the 2.5. So you need to go into HDMI output settings and make sure it's 1080p. Lock it there because it's just defaults to auto. And the switcher will go auto, and the switcher itself is auto. There's two things that's looking at auto, and it just freaks out. Also, make sure you turn off HDMI time code off. It's a feature that Canon put in there, but it's technically not supported in things like the switches. So make sure that's turned off as well.
Next question.
Jack B in Phoenix, Arizona says, does the ATEM Mini have to be plugged into Ethernet, or can it run without a network? I'm not allowed to plug into a client's network due to USG restrictions, but would still like to be able to have HDMI switching.
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so right now I'm controlling my ATEM Mini via the USB-C cable from the computer. So no, I don't need Ethernet to do the control. I can use the software in the computer. And of course, I'm going to just press the buttons on the panel as well. That's not my control.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, and if you can't plug into their network, you can just go direct into a computer. As long as you know what you're doing with your network settings, you can just go direct, right? Ethernet to Ethernet, and you can still use ATEM software control. You just got to get your IP settings correct.
I imagine you could also hook it to like a little Wi-Fi, like a Ethernet to a Wi-Fi connection on your own. It's just an IP connection, so you could just also connect it there, and then you'd be able to have your computers on. I mean, it's not the most stable solution, but if you needed it to do, I wouldn't try to cut a show that way, but I might use it for setup and configuration. So next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, when working internationally, have you ever had to deal with cultural differences in the host country?
Aaron?
By nature, you are always going to have cultural differences when you're traveling anywhere, as a matter of fact, not just internationally. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to be kind and considerate and be interested in what other people have to say and how they do things.
Don't try to be funny. Like rule number one in another country is what you think is funny may not be funny. And so for number one thing we tell people when you go to another country is don't be funny. Like just it's you walk, because I've seen people just say things that they think are funny as an American, and immediately all the faces just go flat, and they won't say anything to you, but you just stepped over something that you shouldn't have. So that's the number one thing. And then for me, I definitely pay attention to what are all the customs, what are all the, as I'm going in, what are the expected, what do people expect as tips? How do they expect to, and then I almost every country I go into, I learn how to say thank you in the local language. So I know how to say thank you in a lot of languages. It makes a huge difference that you made the effort, especially when they're harder, to say thank you. And oftentimes, good morning, all those things. If you can figure out basic ones, you don't have to know everything. You just have to show that you're trying. Go ahead, John.
We did a show in Kuala Lumpur, and the hotel that we stayed in was right next to the mosque. And so when they do prayers early in the morning and in the afternoon, they publicly announce that they do the singing.
Yeah.
And so we had to pause twice a day.
I love the sound of it. I have to admit, when the minarets light up in a Muslim country, there's just something about that, echoing through I spent a lot of time in Dar es Salaam, and you just hear it, the minarets hitting across, and it's just a really incredible sound, especially the first one in the morning. Go ahead, Courtney.
And check the international travel sites. They will show you the customs of each country that you're going into, and especially clothing customs, because some are very strict about no shorts and shoes and head coverings, and so you have to make sure you abide by their local customs.
And you really want to do some research if you're going to go into a country. Like in a lot of Asian countries, showing the putting your feet up and showing the base of your feet is an insult, and so just the way you sit becomes something that is, and they won't call you on it. They know that you're just American, but they, they have very low expectations for us when we go to other countries. But you can go a long way if you just don't step on those. That's the big thing. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, you learn that very quickly when you're in a yurt full of Tibetan monks. Very, very bad thing to do is to stick your bare feet that way.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, has anyone on the panel ever developed for smart TV platforms like the LG Web OS or Samsung Tizen? They both seem to be HTML5 platforms.
Go ahead, Aaron.
So I haven't developed with them directly, but I've worked with people that do for stuff that I did. And, there are HTML apps for them, but you can also do native apps for them, depending on what you're trying to do. Their media players are pretty much all the same. Like you have a set number of formats, and that's what you get. You can't usually add codecs and stuff, but they're not that hard to develop for, really.
Their media players are generally not very good.
I was trying to be nice.
Yeah, so that's a huge issue for a lot of us streaming, is that we have to deal with the TV. The internal TV capacity is horrible, and it's like literally slowing our entire industry down. Next question.
Ted Claudio in Quezon City, the Philippines, is in next with, for Zoom Live Track L8, how can you send audio to a USB 3 or 4, which is USB audio returned from the laptop and that it's connected to? Can you send a USB 1 or 2 by selecting line Zoom L8 audio?
Go ahead, Carl.
So your software on your computer end, you need to target, channel 3 and 4. Let's say you're going GarageBand and you're going back out. Then on the actual mixer itself, under channel 7 and 8, you've actually got a switch where you choose channel 7 and 8 become USB input 1 and 2 or USB input 3 and 4. So you have to do it in two places. One, you have to select in your software, so tell the software what to send out down those channels. Then on the mixer, you can actually have 4 channels going out, but you can only hear channels 7 and 8 on the mixer become either USB 1 and 2 or USB 3 and 4 by hitting those buttons on the actual mixer itself.
Go ahead, Chris, real quick.
Yeah, the L8 is a weird mixer. You also might need to go into the audio MIDI setup and tell that device how many ins and outs you want it to use. I know that on the MixPre, to get all of the inputs and outputs, you have to actually go off of the default, which is 2 in, 2 out. You can change the number of ins and outs that show up as USB devices.
Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. And again, next is the, in this test pattern from the Tour de France, and he has a link there, it mentions 10 separate audio channels in the international feed. How would you generate 10 mixes from one console?
Go ahead, Carl.
So this is very similar to Formula One in Europe as well. So they usually have an English, a Spanish, a French, a German, an Italian, and they also do Dutch in the Formula One. So that's all that really is. So it's not that hard to do multiple commentators coming out into a mixer, when you're actually going out to broadcast, and you're just, you're splitting them out that way.
Great. We had a couple low vote questions. We're pushing back to folks to bring in another day as we shift over. And now we're shifting gears to discuss security. So IT security and cybersecurity, however we want to define that, is something that becomes more and more important, especially as we start to have larger jobs. And a lot of the stuff that we found is that it's important to start building practices that you can use to become more safe as you go, as opposed to trying to do it all at one time when you have a big job that you suddenly have to be more secure. So understanding what some of those are and discussing those, it seemed like it was a request, and I thought it was a good request to discuss. So if you've got questions around cybersecurity or IT security, make sure to throw those into Makana and vote those up. We have a couple questions, and I think that we'll just go ahead and jump into it. And then we'll stop. If we run out of questions, we'll stop and chat for a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump into the first question.
The first one comes from Daniel Elia in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he says, with the increased focus on third-party security, what can smaller providers do to meet increasingly large corporate client security requirements for those that do work with them? Where should they start to focus, as doing it all is not feasible?
Go ahead, John.
So I have a longtime friend here in Las Vegas. His name of his company is Pier 64, and they offer security as a service, and they do a fantastic job.
It's called Pier. Sorry, say that again.
Pier64.com.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, there's a framework that's fairly common, and I use it with a lot of small businesses as well. The NIST framework, which will handle different levels of security, like least privilege, for example, backup strategies, malware mitigation, firewalls, etc. So while those larger priced audits can be prohibitively expensive for smaller businesses, looking at the NIST framework is a great place to start, and it's free to take a look at it.
That's great. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, in these kind of scenarios, you may find you come up against the challenge or requirement to have cyber insurance. And if you do, once you go down that path, you'll be given a pretty solid set of requirements that you need to adhere to in order to be able to get that insurance. And if you get to that point, you should be quite well covered or in a good spot to engage those clients.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, this is a very, very hard question to answer, in a succinct, easy way, because we have no idea what you're trying to protect and the size of the organization. But a great deal can be accomplished simply by doing, level training for everybody. Run your updates, make sure everything is up to date, and find a way to make sure that is, from the very bottom of an organization to the very top. That by itself can solve a great deal of your problems. Also, just be sure that, everyone who's in charge of networking is on the same page. We'll leave it at that.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry. Security is a set of layers, right? And you could kind of start in any layer you want, but the human layer is the hardest one to deal with. And most security problems can be mitigated with very simple technology things, but much more training on the human side. Teaching people how to do stuff correctly and securely is incredibly important. I do this every day for my real job, and it's I do a lot of tech stuff, but mostly what I'm doing is training people on how to use two-factor authentication, do this, do that, do the other thing.
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I concur. I've made a lot of videos for our clients about the wetware problem and training them. And judging by the content of the videos that we're asked to make, it's astonishing how underinformed a lot of people are about security issues. I mean, the stuff that they're drilling into their heads, like, really? Do you have to tell people that? yes, we do. They're doing it wrong.
Well, I think that oftentimes, sometimes you can say that someone who has a messy household doesn't have enough shelves. A lot of times they don't have enough shelves. They don't have enough places to put things. You have to get rid of things, but you also have to put things. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we have to think about when we develop these systems is that we have to make it easy or relatively easy for people to do the right thing. If we just make it hard and we don't give them the tools, like for me, keeping track of passwords for all these different websites was hugely complicated, to try to put something in that you can remember, and then where do you put it? And you don't want to put it in a data, you don't want to put it anywhere, but you have to remember it. And so people would break down when you get something like 1Password or LastPass or, other things like that. And the big thing, like for us with like something like LastPass, was not only did we have somewhere that basically you just go into a culture where every external facing, so the login to LastPass is a phrase from my childhood, a phrase that no one would know. No one but me would know what that phrase is. It's long, and so that it would be very, very hard. And I never say it. It's never come out of my mouth in my lifetime. And so those are the ones that I have to remember are phrases. They're not some gobbledygook or a hash or some short thing. They're a phrase that is going to come from something in my childhood, typically, before the internet, that's, that I would have had. It would be very, very hard to, the only place you would get that phrase is if you were keylogging, so that's the thing you still have to be careful of. Now that controls access to the rest of my passwords, and the rest of my passwords are hashes. They're just, create 26 random characters and stick them in here, and you just always see with my thing when it goes in, it'll be like 26 characters, and now I will say that I'm crippled if you take me away from LastPass. I can't log on to other people's computers very often, which is probably a good idea. But the first thing I put on everything is LastPass. And then I also, with LastPass, I have it set up for 2-factor. I have it set up for, I also have my LastPass set up so that it can only be logged into one thing at a time. So if I leave something behind and I log into something new, it doesn't leave LastPass open somewhere else. And then for us, we've used a lot of the LastPass, in PixCore more because we really had to manage enormous numbers of high-profile passwords. We didn't give anybody the password that if they didn't need it, we just gave them access to it through LastPass. So it'll put it in it'll fill in the password, but the person because I don't want to, as a person, I don't want to manage any more passwords. Like we'd have clients that would want to give me admin access to YouTube for a very high level person. And I'd be like, I want you to make me a manager. I don't want I don't want that access. I don't want to know what that is, because remember that handing out people's passwords doesn't just hand out the password. It hands out the pattern. I can look at people. If I get 2 or 3 passwords that someone gives me, I can start guessing passwords. This is how they're going to, because people will build hashes around the website. They'll use the name of the thing that they were logging into, but they'll capitalize the first letter and use a number for the first vowel. And they'll, there's a whole bunch of things that they'll do to do that becomes problematic. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you mentioned something there at the very end. I was going to say, if you use a phrase for your master password, try and use non-dictionary words or misspell them in a way that you'll remember, because brute force will, just substitute words to try and crack those kind of passwords. And if somebody has targeted you and wants to spend enough money on it, the brute force will eventually get through.
If someone broke into mine, I have to say, I'd be hilarious. I think they would find that hilarious. Anyway, Jason.
Yeah. If my advice would be one thing, it's absolutely get a password manager. I mean, I have thousands and thousands of passwords. I don't know any of them. Straight up, I do not know any of them. And that, if don't fool yourself into thinking that in this day and age, you can come up with enough entropy to come up with, something that is secure.
You can remember. You can remember.
Exactly.
That's the problem, is that you can't remember it otherwise. And then what you do is you write it down on something. As soon as you write it down or put it in your notes or put it into an Excel doc or whatever, you're now creating an externality that is a security breach. I work with someone, and this was not recently, but I work with someone who had an Excel file of all their passwords, you know, hundreds of passwords, you know, like they were just, anyway, go ahead, Aaron.
That is ridiculous. I wanted to point out one thing that I have been using a long time is hardware security keys. This is what I use, YubiKey. It is a little, if you go, let me see here, sorry. If I go to like these, they have they're little tiny keys that plug into your USB port, and they have a button, and they generate a password when you when you hit the button. Google supports these, 1Password, LastPass, all the major providers support these, and they're fabulous because you eliminate phishing when you use these, because you have to have the key, right? It's cryptographic. So I recommend everybody buy one of these. Everybody at my company, all 40 people have one of these, and it's required to log on to any of our stuff. If you don't have it, you don't get to log on. And if you've, so, and like the one I have here, this one, it is two-ended, so it has USB-C and Lightning on it. And then you can also get ones that have NFC as well for like Android phones. Works great.
There's an iPhone version too.
Yeah, that's what I'm showing. Yeah. This is the iPhone version.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just oh, there's two Jasons.
Oh no,
I'm sorry, Jason.
Which Jason? Thanks. That happens sometimes. Back to that question where they were asking about, where do you start? To do everything at one time is maybe a bit overwhelming or not feasible. I would ask the client, what is their do they have priorities? Is there certain things they may require for one type of vendor or a different type of vendor, such as yourself? And if things seem a bit much or a bit overwhelming, maybe go with a consultant, maybe somebody like who Courtney asked, kind of have them help you out with things.
Right. And Seth, this is what you do? Is this you're a consultant for this type of thing?
I do.
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
That wasn't for me. Sorry.
Yeah, so I do IT predominantly for media organizations is pretty much my full time here in Massachusetts. So a lot of it has to do with it, and a lot of the clients that I work with are either working for or related to some local governments and municipalities. So security is pretty critical, and it's just a matter of trying to work through those different layers and trying to also bridge that gap between convenience and security, because at the end of the day, everybody needs to do their job, but try and be safe doing it.
Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, I too have spent a dozen years building, fixing, and teaching technology, and production over the last 5 years has become more and more of it. I'm not going to mention the name of this app because if you just type it in, you're not going to get the right one. Instead, I'm going to put a link directly into Mukana. What I like about this specific app is on the back end, they do everything right as far as two-factor authentication is concerned. It will allow you to take, instead of having one app for Google and one app for this, everyone wants their own 2FA. This will allow you to import those barcodes and have them on Mac OS and the iPhone. The downside to this is that, of course, if you're syncing between devices, you're using iCloud. So that's a bit of a problem, but it's certainly better than nothing.
Let's jump to the next question.
Moving on, we have Rupert McRae up next. And Rupert says, what type of cyber threat does the panel find the most concerning?
Go ahead, Jason.
Ransomware, straight up.
Seth.
Lateral movement in a network is what concerns me the most. So that would mean that once you're in there, you immediately gain access to everything else that's within that exact same network. So really, like, one of the first things that I like to prioritize is looking at the access and the privilege that every user account has on a network, and then start building up some fences so that, for example, the accounting and finance team of your organization does not need to access where all your video archives are, and vice versa. To that end as well, not everyone on a production team may need edit and delete ability on a video archive server. So giving all of your users just the exact amount of privilege that they need to do their job can make a world of difference, so that in the event that some level of a breach does occur, you can at least somewhat minimize the damage overall.
Go ahead, Jim.
Anything state-sponsored, especially if it's targeting media for the purposes of sowing the seeds of, you know, distrust amongst ourselves.
Discontent.
Yeah, discontent. Yeah.
Yeah. Aaron?
I've been dealing with state-sponsored stuff for the last 2 weeks, so I know how that is. But my biggest fear, I guess, is human attack. So anything based in psychological stuff to get into your network. That's the way most ransomware attacks work, except for the script kiddie ones. You know, that's basic IT security, but I really do focus on the people, because the people are your back door. And yeah.
Yep. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, all good points. I just wanted to pick up on the point Seth made about you know, scaling back people's permissions to just what they need. One thing I've seen over and over again over time is that, you know, people in organizations, if they're with that organization for some time, they accumulate permissions over time. They'll go from role to role, and they'll get new permissions added, and nobody will go back and scrape out the old permissions that they need. And things happen, and you investigate it, and you find that some of these lateral attacks are because that user had permissions to something they used a year ago and was no longer relevant. So you've got to keep these things maintained also.
And the tricky part, and this is why you need a robust IT staff, is to make it relatively invisible to the user of what access they have and don't have. When users run into the wall, they start going around it, they go through it, they go under it, they go over it, and it actually makes you less secure than you were before. So we see this a lot in organizations that we've worked with, that people, you know, they can't get the security to work. So then they just do something else. They write it down on a piece of paper, they ask a friend to do a thing, they start passing things back and forth. So security that's too high, that is in the way of what they're doing, that they're legitimately doing, becomes a security breach, because they'll start breaching it because they're not going to call IT every single time they can't get it done. Or if the other key is to make sure IT is responsive enough that it can get fixed relatively quickly. If I have something I have to do in 10 minutes and you're telling me you're going to take 3 days to get back to me, then I'm just going to figure out some other way to do it. You know, and that's the problem with a lot of security measures that I see in like large corporations when I'm you know, some color badge that I'm in there. You know, I've floated around through a lot of these corporations, and you just see that's a common problem. Go ahead, Aaron.
The most effective security organizations that I've ever worked with are not there to say no. They're to say, they're there to work with you to make what you want to do happen.
Right.
The ones that just say no reflexively are generally always out of date and not very proactive, as a matter of fact, even though they act like they are being.
Yeah. Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, if one knows what they are doing, would you trust using FreeBSD or OpenBSD or Linux as a production network firewall, or would you prefer a commercial product, even if you have to pay support per year?
Go ahead, Jason.
I would very much prefer kind of like an all-in-one little box, you know, even something as simple as the tiny hardware firewall. When you get into an entire operating system, even if you know what you're doing, it is just, this is one of these cases where the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
So a product that I really lean on and really like, and it is FreeBSD based, is pfSense. And I like to use the appliances that are built by the actual manufacturer, Netgate. With that, you can add on enterprise levels of support, different services for intrusion detection, et cetera. But it is a super flexible platform. It is a super affordable platform compared to some of the larger names, but you have all the resources available to you that you would expect from filtering, as well as built-in VPN, et cetera. It's really a great product to learn, and it's used in a lot of larger corporations as well.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, here on the panel often says, should outgoing router firewall rules always be defaulted to none and allowed protocols and ports open by exception?
Go ahead, Aaron.
So at the sort of network edge level, no, unless you want to proxy everything, which is a hell, and you'll have 400 IT tickets every day. People won't be able to do their jobs. So it's better to do detection of things passing through the network rather than just blocking. Like blocking is a hammer that you should use wisely as opposed to something. Yeah, I think the outgoing to none is a sort of anachronism at this point.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, there is absolutely never, rarely do I get to use superlatives, but in this case, it's a negative superlative. There is no always when it comes to security. And also log packets, log traffic before you start cranking down stuff on an edge router, because you'll get problems real quick.
The hardest part we've had with large corporations is they'll say, well, I say, can you open up these ports, like 1935 or what, like these are our RTMP ports. So like, no, we can't, those are closed. And why are they closed? Like, and they're like, because they're closed. Like they don't know why they're closed. They're just closed, and then you have to, then there's huge amounts of, again, things that probably open up their network to other problems for us to get through that network to figure out how we're going to actually do an event, or we end up doing it like with a MiFi I've literally had ones where they have all the bandwidth in the world and we brought a SAT truck in, for $12,000 because they wouldn't open up 1935. Anyway, next question.
A. Mitchell's in Washington's up next with, is the permanent resident background web server with Zoom finally gone? Or after install, does it still require quite a bit of work to remove it from the computer or device?
It was removed right away. As soon as people realized it was there. It was terrible.
What I don't even know what this is.
There was a fire on the Zoom client for Mac and Windows. They ran on Mac especially, they ran a web server that was sort of hidden away behind Zoom. So it only started when you started your Zoom, but it was used to do some control stuff. And they got rid of it because, well,
everyone freaked out.
Yeah. Yeah. It was during the time of everyone's freaked out about Zoom all the time.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
Craig Tahita in Dallas. Any recommendations on educating internal security teams on cloud production workflows? They are not familiar with systems that don't run 24/7 like a typical web server.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, for AWS, for example, they have a framework that you can download, the security pillar framework, well-architected networks. It kind of covers at a high level what you should be concerned about and provides details to dig in. And there's, of course, certifications that you can go down as well that have a security focus for AWS or any of the other major providers.
Next question.
Rupert McRae here in the panel, Dallas, Texas. In what ways can or should cybersecurity measures be adjusted to suit the type of client, risk profile, and environment of any particular project?
Aaron?
Anytime you create a Venn diagram between two different security organizations, it explodes. So yeah, I don't really know how best to, for in terms of overall security of whatever your client is. Yeah, it's always going to be different for everybody. I mean, their needs are different.
Jason.
Yeah, I would say in all circumstances, you have to adapt the network for the organization. It's not the other way around. The network exists to serve the organization. And if somebody is going to go directly against your suggestions, get it in writing and get it from someone really high up that they understand the ramifications of what they're doing.
Next question.
Jason Panks in Nashville is up next and said, has anyone used zero tier instead of a VPN for sending and receiving OSC and HTTP control commands specifically?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, Chirig's in the chat. We used it, and he still uses it today for controlling the stream decks from his cloud instances. When we got into some discussions with Tucker, he's just like, no, I caught that thing doing some packets going over to some Eastern Bloc countries in Europe. So he's like, no more zero tier. So he uses, and I believe he recommends Hamachi or one of the other ones that you pay for. So I'd be weary of something that's free. So I installed it off my computer after we were done with it because, and it's again, one thing that I like to do is put stuff up in the cloud when I'm doing stuff like this so that I could just trash that OS and it has no links back to my computer that has, business stuff on it. So there is something to be said about using AWS because, I mean, remember, AWS is just a computer in somebody else's data center. And so if you want to play with something that you think might be, or just isolate something like an email or something that somebody sent, I like to use Amazon Workspaces and just pop stuff open in there and take a look at it. And that way you're not exposing your actual network, just use somebody else's.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I don't use zero tier, but I use Tailscale. I have friends that work there. I know how good it is. And it is a VPN. I mean, they're all a VPN, but this is a full mesh VPN. So it's like you're creating a whole other kind of layer on top of your network.
Jason?
I've been playing around with Keela. I haven't, rolled it out with anything yet, but they have a really neat way of doing VPN that I'm kind of putting through its paces right now. The link's in Makana.
Mm-hmm. All right, go ahead. Next question.
Ted Claudio, Quezon City, Philippines, is back with what are the best practices for setting up your local area network and connecting production devices when you want to go to a site for an event?
So before anyone else jumps in, I guess what we built around, and this is not the inexpensive solution, is that because we build around Meraki systems, our entire LAN is all sitting on Meraki, but when we go out into the field, we send out appliances, and those appliances could be up to Meraki 400s or as little as a lot of the little ones we're using right now are, I think, the threes, X3, M3, some version of that.
Z3, I think.
Z3, that's it. So I have a little Z3 at my office, for instance, that will tie me directly at home. And so the cool thing about that is in addition to having, some level of security, all of our IPs, when we set something up in the office, all of the IPs are all set for our entire system. So the switcher and the hyperdecks and everything else and we leave those on DHCP. And then what we do is we provision them within the Meraki appliance so that they all get what they need to do. That way, when we go in and turn it on, I can literally, if you tell me what system, because every system has a certain subnet number. If you tell me what system it is, I can just type it into my computer at home, and I'm now sitting in that switcher and and using MixEffect Pro on that switcher, or whatever. There's a danger to that if there's too many people that know how to do that. So you have to be careful that people will accidentally log into the wrong switcher and start switching your show. So you have to, there are things that we have to kind of think about there, but there usually has only been a handful of us that can do that. Anyway, but the point is that it stays relatively secure, and then also we have control of it. Now, there are companies we work with that do not like Meraki connections going into their, they don't want that level of, because it suddenly there's a whole to the point where that Aaron was talking about, like suddenly you see a whole lot of traffic going through ports that you're not used to, because the Meraki's using them to manage itself. So that's the part where it starts throwing red flags for in a building that we connect to. Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, so definitely along the lines of using something like those Meraki appliances, going out in the field with a router where your IP addresses are defined, definitely, and then if it can VPN back, most definitely. Another step that I've done to make it a little bit more intuitive for some of the people I work with is to use internal DNS servers as well, and to tie that in with the DHCP servers, so that, for example, you can have ATEM Mini 1 dot and then an internal domain name, for example, ATEM Mini 2. That way, you're not totally memorizing a phone book of IP addresses for a network, but it just takes that one less step involved looking something up in a spreadsheet before you have to log into something.
Absolutely. We've done that with our elementals as well, and it worked really well. You say, this elemental, and it would just bring it up. Jason.
Yeah, I would say color code your equipment, put the IP address on the equipment, segregate using DNS and like programmable switches. And, if you've got Dante, give it its own switch. Don't put it anywhere near the rest of it. Get everything as segmented as possible, but make it very clear. Color code it with Ethernet, the whole 9 yards, and then only put on the public-facing internet the stuff that you absolutely need.
Next question.
Comes from our friend Jan Landy, who's in Phuket, Thailand right now. And he says, I'm going to try to paraphrase this to make sense. VPNs.
Well, actually, just go ahead and read it out. Just read it out the way he wrote it.
Okay. VPN should mask your IP address and show you in a location that your VPN provider lets you. And if that is the case, how does Google TV or Netflix know that you are not in America when you are traveling in an other country?
Go ahead, Jason.
Because VPN allows you to choose your exit node. It's where you emerge onto the public internet. There's a common misconception that VPN anonymizes you. It doesn't. What it does is it allows you to emerge somewhere that is, known in a known geographical region. That's why.
Yeah, and go ahead, Aaron.
They are looking for. They're not looking for just. They're looking for your IP. But they also have lists of IPs that are residential in those countries, and they
also have lists of the IPs that come out of these,
and they know
vanish,
that's what I was about to say.
And everything else.
Exactly.
So all of those are this is like constant cat and mouse. So you might be able to get a new IP, and then it'll be dead somewhere in the future because they're gonna figure out that they're getting a bunch of traffic. As soon as a lot of people use whatever the IP is that they're creating, it gets turned off. Rupert?
Yeah, and just the sort of the final answer is that IP addresses are registered through registrars, basically directories, a bit like domain names, and those are geolocated, and the IP address space is divided up into subnets, and really and truly each IP and each subnet that it belongs to is registered as to its location. So that's kind of how they look that information up.
Next question.
Jan's back from Phuket and says, curious to know what brand VPN the panelists are using and what their options are of why they are using that brand.
Carl?
NordVPN, it works for Formula One. I'm happy.
Jason?
I'm with Alex. When it's mission critical, Meraki is absolutely unbeatable.
And it's a mixture between its utility and its ease of use. I mean, I think that's the thing, is there's definitely other ones that have the same utility as the Meraki systems. It's just that the Meraki tends to manage. It's just easier to manage. Go ahead, Aaron.
I use Mulvad. They don't log. They don't even take your name if you don't want them to. Mm-hmm. So,
go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I use PFSense by Netgate, both for site to site between locations I control, as well as site to AWS, and terminate there.
Yep. Rupert?
Yeah, exactly. I don't use any of the commercial off-the-shelf, monthly subscription VPNs. I use PFSense, and if I need to break out somewhere, I'll go into AWS and terminate that way.
Mm-hmm. Next question.
Gerald Grieve in Richmond says, does the panel recommend any intrusion detection or pen testing software?
Jason?
No. Not, at least I don't, in a word. If you want to do pen testing, hire a firm that's reputable, that's going to give you a full report and talk you through what they find. Software itself is kind of useless on its own.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that we have found is that when you need serious security, like if you're getting into something where you may run into real hackers, not casual ones, and people who are really serious about it, you now need a service. Like, this isn't something that you can buy some software or a piece of hardware that's going to protect you from. And there's very little that we want to be clear. There's very little that will protect you from a state actor. like there's just, that's not, that's a whole different level of stuff. But if
you don't have that kind of money.
Yeah. And the bottom line is, but you be careful. Like, for instance, all of our stuff, there's other things when we get past security, we have code names for things. We have, we don't keep things around that we don't need. there's a lot of things that you start to do that are on top of that. So that if it breaks through, there's just not a lot to grab onto. Go ahead, Rupert.
And if you do end up engaging a firm to help you with that, chances are they'll be using some back-end system like CrowdStrike or Alien Vault to manage that stuff.
Yeah, Jason.
Yeah, to build on what Alex was saying, the only way to beat a state actor is with an extremely robust and constantly used backup system, and even that probably isn't good enough.
There's no way to beat a state actor. Like, slow them down. Like that's all you're doing. All you're doing is slowing them down until your project's over. So you just make it hard enough for long enough that you can get through what you're doing. But once you get to that level, and again, that comes down to data retention. I mean, there's things that you're legally required to retain, but if there are things that are sensitive that if they got out, since we do media, you worry about you have to be very careful of not hitting record before the show starts, or if you did, throwing that away, or if you keeping open mics, open cameras, open, that's a lot of times for us as media people, that's what people are looking for. They're looking for something to embarrass or hold against somebody over time. And so you're constantly trying to make sure that it's not that you just don't have it. I think that's a big piece of it. Next question.
JJ McKenna in San Rafael, our friend, comes in an environment where the IT team actually implements BYOD, bring your own device features. Are there several production crippling issues present? Severe, not are there several, are there severe production crippling issues present?
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, so in a BYOD network, customarily, you'll have different VLANs set up where you've got your proper corporate LAN that's operating in one bucket, then another VLAN where your teams are bringing in their own devices. So making sure that your firewall rules are well tuned to allow access across from one network to another when necessary is critically important. Otherwise, severe production crippling issues I've noticed with BYOD is the ability to print on corporate printers, which are the bane of existence for any IT guy.
Jason.
Yeah, this is where the dress rehearsal really comes in handy, and it's worth mentioning to absolutely everyone. If you plan on using an X device for this, you need to tell us in advance, and if not, it's not going to work.
In the areas that we've done that, usually to be really secure, it comes with them installing software on your device that means that they can pretty much see everything that you're doing in that device. So you just kind of have to know that whatever you're doing there, that's how, if you're going to do if you're really need that level of security for some of the corporations that I've worked for, they're usually installing stuff on it. And then that phone becomes that phone. The phone that I use for that is the phone that belongs to that, in my head belongs to that company. And I assume that while I'm checking email or doing something that someone on the other side could be reading it. So it's I don't think they ever do, or very rarely, but I assume that when I'm doing a text or anything else, that there's somebody else looking at the phone. Go ahead, Rupert.
The traditional security architecture is being built around borders. You have a corporate firewall, you have a corporate environment, your office, whatever. Borderless security was sort of a buzzword that started coming in a few years ago, but these days it's about what they call zero trust, which means you trust nothing. What was a corporate network now is just a bandwidth pipe. And just like you say, the trusted devices are the ones that get something installed on them that gives end-to-end encryption. So it doesn't, in fact, really matter whether they're inside the corporate network or outside. You get that end-to-end encryption.
Yeah, Jason. Thanks.
The only thing I would add to that is if you're doing the network correct, perfect forward secrecy means, just because you have it now doesn't mean you can have it in the future. And that's really important.
Thanks. Start calling you Panks if you're okay.
That's fine. Yeah. With BYOD, just be aware, or maybe ask, are they considering you to be a guest user? Guest users might have no access to any other device on the network, and you may only get internet out. So just be aware if you need other resources.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, zero trust is what I would say most organizations are going to these days, especially with work from home. They had to open the firewall. There's a reason that, places like Facebook and Google and stuff don't even have firewalls. They're just, they have firewalls, but they don't have VPNs, except unless to very, very specific things like PCI compliant type stuff or SOC 2 compliant type admin stuff. They don't VPN anywhere. You just you just use your apps and log in, which is the way my company is set up. Actually, we don't use a VPN.
Apple had employees, driving to the campus to like actually go and get stuff during, the worst of COVID, because of the way that the security was set up. So, I mean, I don't know. I can't say that everyone always does something or doesn't.
Yeah, no comment. Next question.
Ted Claudio of Quezon City, Philippines is back with this one. What tips can you give in coordinating with the IT department of your clients for doing digital first events like opening firewall ports and so forth?
Rule number one is be nice. Like literally they have an enormous amount of power over how your show is going to go. And it is so easy to get snippy with them because you can't get something on time or you can't get something. And in general, everyone's serving your project while you're there or someone to be nice to, but really be nice to the IT folks because they can just stop returning your calls. Like they're not in front of you. You have no idea where they are. The person managing port number, 261 is probably in Singapore, and so the thing is that you just have to, and so lots of thank yous and lots of really, really nice emails and very clear instructions of what you need, not rambling of what you want, but very clear, like all they have to do is cut and paste this into something. Really makes a big difference in the level of speed at which things get done. Jason?
Yeah, talk to them like they're people because it may be your game, but it's their house. It is their house. No matter what anybody says, talk to them like people and be nice to them.
Yeah, Carl?
So you want to approach whoever their network security czar is for that corporation. You want to approach them with the building blocks you need to happen, but ask them to give them their solution to how to get these building blocks to work out of their corporation if they want to do this digital first event. So, and then if they give you an answer that doesn't fit with what they can do, you can say, well, how do you have this on the facility? And then they go, oh, okay, we'll get you into that pipeline then. But let them come up with a solution so they have ownership of the event as well.
Yeah, Rupert?
Yeah, and although you may want to be asked, you may want to need to have things opened, but keep in mind that the objective is to keep things secure. So if you come at it from that angle, then you can work collaboratively.
Thanks.
Yeah, as someone who works with end users and requests in an IT department, just be mindful of their timeframes. They may have a lot going on, and just to be ahead of it as much as possible. It might take them 1 to 4 or 5 days to implement the request you've made. Just be mindful of that.
Yeah, because there are some where the builds happen at certain times. Like you can't make the change right now. Like, like the changes can be submitted and then they have to be sandboxed and tested and processed. And there's a whole so even though that might take them 10 minutes to put it into the system, you got to wait until the next window. And over time, you get to know when those, if you work with a company long enough, you know when the windows are. And so you make sure, we have to make that request by 1 o'clock on Tuesday or we won't see it for another week. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and also on that same token, there are companies, especially public companies, that have change freezes for anything, like right before they report out and those kind of things. So there are sometimes you just can't make that change right now.
Yeah. Next question.
JJ McKenna in San Rafael, California, and our friend says the 2021 Gartner Endpoint Protection Platform report removed Palo Alto Networks as a viable solution. Are there reasons known to the panel for this exclusion related to production?
No, we don't know. We don't know. All right, next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. What are the security considerations for a one-off live streaming event?
Go ahead, Jason.
Make sure you have the upstream, make sure it is unencumbered, make sure your firewall ports are opened, and you've got a good subnet for your production devices. That's it.
A lot of times you're going to be given passwords for someone's YouTube page or Facebook page or some kind of access, whatever. Those are really important. And a lot of really bad things can happen if they get leaked out or something like that. And so, I mean, that's the end of people's careers if you lose those. And so you have to be super careful with them. Generally, we do everything we can avoid to get them. You know, we don't want, we want manager access to that account, not the password to the admin if we can avoid it. Now, some people just can't give us that for a variety of reasons, but we'll do everything we can to not get a hold of their password. Again, because once you see it, if it gets caught somewhere, it's a pattern. Like they have a certain way. Now, there's some that just give you hashes, and then you know that they're serious. So anyway, then the other thing though is that we generally only have one person, you know, maybe two that have access to that login. You know, so we try to minimize the number of people that are touching it, and we try to have it be an account that is just going to do that thing. You know, and so that there's a person that's going to do that, but we're not passing it around as best we can to anybody, you know, to do that. And we definitely don't use email, don't do anything that's related to people logging in over email, text, you know, those types of things. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I've gotten to the end of just, I don't want any of that information. I want to come sit down next to you. This was when you could do this. Sit down next to you and just tell you how to set it up, and then give me the little piece of information I need, the key or whatever. That way I don't even know. I don't want to know.
Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, so this is true, I think, of a one-off as well as a recurring type of event, and that's also taking physical security into consideration. Probably even more so during a one-off event, because you might be very quickly staging up equipment and you've got your different computers all logged in, et cetera. You're being handed critical information. So making sure your screen is locked when you're walking away, and just some of those basic physical security steps too often go overlooked, and it's just as critical.
I definitely have all my computers locked when I shut them, and I shut them all the time. You'll always see me just like, as soon as I walk away from my computer, I will generally just shut the screen, and then I have to log back in again. Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you're doing anything where you have to rehearse a presentation with a prompter or something, make sure you know where all those feeds are going, and make sure it's not going out over a stream for rehearsal, because if you're rehearsing a corporate meeting of some sort, it can affect the stock price if information leaks in advance. So, and you're liable for, SEC lawsuits and things. So
one of the things that we do in our patch bays that we've built in the past is we'll have a series of patches that go to the outside world. So if we pull these pins out of the patch bay, it can't go to the SAT truck, can't go to fiber, can't go to the encoders, can't go to, this is the signal, and they're all these red pins, and so, they're labeled. You pull those out and we can now rehearse, we can rehearse, we can do whatever we want. We can do what we need to do. We put those pins back in and we're ready for a show. But having them in a nice, clear place that's well, marked and all in one place, you just pull those out and you drop signal to the rest of the world. Just makes it a lot easier. And we don't do it with routers. We do it with patch panels, so that it's a physical, open and shut the door to the process. And these are I don't do this for everything, but these are for the very highest, million or more viewer kind of events that will affect stock prices if things go out. Go ahead. Next question.
JJ McKenna back in from San Rafael, and he says, does the Zoom device management ZDM interface have any controls built in to ensure that valid bug scrubs are available to address potential threat vectors?
Go ahead, Aaron.
No, that's a device. That's a better device manager than that.
Next question. Oh, sorry, Rupert.
I was going to agree with that. I mean, there's some features there, but they're minimal. And every time I look at it, it's like, wow, this is for somebody that has nothing, but you should have more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas says, when SolarWinds were under cyber attack earlier this year, they quickly called the FBI. Who would you call if you were under cyber attack?
The FBI.
Yeah, the FBI. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
The FBI.
Yeah.
Who is the FBI?
They are the this is their specialty, or one of their specialties. so
it's literally their job.
Yeah. So that would be, and I think SolarWinds also pointed us towards one of the real reasons that you have to be thinking about it all the time, not just when you now want to tighten up, is I think that one sat in the system for a long time, and that's what people are getting good at, is letting them just don't do anything with them. And there was another one that wasn't SolarWinds. It was an Exchange server process. And they said, well, we don't know it doesn't seem to be anything because it's not doing anything. I'm like, yeah, it's not doing anything yet. like that is a long gestation is a great virus, and so because it can just sit there and just pass around before it and no one's stopping it. Next question.
That was cool what Jim did. We should have a day when we answer everything in Jeopardy answers.
Yeah, Jeopardy answers. Yeah, exactly. Next question.
Jan Landy in Phuket, Thailand is back in with, I know of a few authenticators. For example, Authy, LastPass, Google, and so forth. Is there value of using any of these services? And if so, is there one that is better than another? And should you use more than one?
Go ahead, Aaron.
So for one-time passwords, yeah, any of those is fine. Do not use SMS if you can get away with it. Do not use SMS for getting your passwords. They will get stolen.
Yeah, takes no time whatsoever to do a quick SIM clone, and just do not use SMS. Keep in mind, just about everyone that you've listed there has had one little mistake or another, and really what matters is how well and how quickly they fix it and how they adapt to whatever mismanagement happened. So yeah, just keep up on that.
Go ahead, Rupert.
We're talking about authenticate MFA authenticator apps, then I just personally only use the Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, or Okta.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next with Lenovo's Yoga Pad Pro Android tablet with HDMI input. Seems great for certain things, but with all the back and forth about Android security, what would the panel suggest to secure them for production use?
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay, I'm sorry to be a cynic, but I would never use an Android tablet in production. I'm sorry. I don't hate them, but I really would never use one.
Next question.
JJ McKenna is up with, have any users tried the Chrome remote desktop solution to access devices during production that are behind firewalls?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Not during, I've never done it during production, but I've done it and it works great. It's basically just RDP. So,
Go, Rupert.
Yeah, you have to respect some of these firewall rules. If there is a firewall there intended to stop remote access and you just happen to find some way around it, then you've got to keep in mind that you're breaking the principle of the firewall rule. So if the corporate IT or whatever find out that you're doing that, that still compromises their security principles. So just, again, open that dialogue with whoever's managing that system so that you make sure you're in compliance.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas says, is having cyber insurance an increasing requirement and competitive advantage in the marketplace?
All right, go ahead, Jason.
I don't think it's a competitive advantage, but it can actually be somewhat problematic if you get the wrong kind of insurance, or if it becomes, publicly known that you have insurance up to X amount. The brokers tend to take that into account when you're negotiating.
I do think that insurance in general is something that does give you a competitive advantage in the sense that, for instance, there were a lot of places in my former company that we could work that other people couldn't work because we just had enormous amounts of liability loss, E&O, and all those other things that were all stacked up. So I think that when you add that, I think there is going to increasingly be companies that will only do work with you if you have that, because it means that to have the insurance, you also had to do all these other things. So it requires that level. I don't think they're looking for the protection, but they are looking.
I misunderstood the question. Yeah,
but,
of course.
But they're definitely looking for the fact that you went through a certain amount of work and you took it seriously. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Nick Pavlnak in Southeast Michigan says, Alex, there were several people on YouTube asking what headset you're using today.
Oh, slightly different. I'm using a Countryman. So this is a Countryman E6, or I believe it's an E6. Yeah.
H6.
Sorry, say it again.
H6, isn't it?
Or H6, yeah. Countryman H6. The E6, I think, is the one that is a lav. So anyway, but yeah, and it works pretty well. I swap between this one and the DPA to when I'm traveling. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, do you perform criminal background checks, substance abuse testing, or any other background screening on crew? I'd bet it'd be harder with freelance crew than with permanent employees. Would using a labor broker be safer?
Go ahead, Carl.
So there are strict rules about that kind of stuff as well. So be aware of where you are and what you're asking. Just asking it can be illegal.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, for many programs that we've had for specific jobs that we've gone through, we've definitely had to do background checks across everyone. So it depends on. Oftentimes we ask for what service they want. Some of them they have their own service, so that they do that for us. But other ones you want to ask what their preferred service is if we're going into a specific job that requires that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is in with, have you ever had to handle digital nomads or remote workers in a foreign country? If so, what security issues have you had? And there's an HBR article he links there.
Go ahead, Aaron.
My entire company is a bunch of digital nomads, I guess. I don't know. We don't have an office. We are all over the world, and people move frequently. Being proactive about potential state actors and understanding what the boundaries are around how to work in the place they're going is really important.
Go ahead, Jason.
The only thing I'd add to that is, digital nomads in practice are not very much different than, somebody who's working outside of the office remotely. I would say, if they're using a password manager like LastPass, I would limit their ability to log in to the country that they are in at any given time, if possible. Simple things like that. Plus, make sure you stay in touch with them.
Rupert and then Jim, real quick. We're running out of time.
Just have to be careful if you are supporting people who are traveling around the world and they are in a location where using certain services is prohibited. You have to be careful about what advice or tools you give them to get what they need to do done.
Yeah. Jim.
Yeah, in some cases, you actually, depending on who your customers are, you may not be able to have anybody outside of a specific country. They have to be, as an example, a U.S. person.
Yeah. So, next question.
Douglas Carmichael, of the two major network equipment makers, does the panel prefer Cisco or Juniper for infrastructure applications?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I mean, if you're working in a team or designing a system, really, you have to look at how readily is that expertise available, how readily is support available, and that's really just that defines what the preferred platform might be.
Yeah, Jason.
Depends very heavily on the use case, so I can't say one or the other.
Next question.
Lou Perez in Phoenix says, can anyone recommend a template for incident response plans?
Yeah, Aaron.
The ones built into Jira from Atlassian are really good.
Yep. Jim?
Yeah, NIST has some examples as well.
Rupert?
Jim said.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when you have a incident, the thing to do is report it as quickly as possible. Like even if it's a small one, like you just say, hey, this is what happened, and it will cause upset, and people come visit you and talk to you about it, and figure it out. But it's definitely worth having the conversation soon, because once it's in there, the longer it's in there, the longer the breach occurs. You don't want it will come back to you. So like it's better to sort it out very quickly. And I've had to do that where I've created an incident that I then had to like sew up, and it was, we contacted people very quickly, and there's a whole lot of meetings, and it was fine. Like nothing bad happened, but it was one of those things you're just going too fast, and you did something, and you're just like, okay, I got to tell people that I did that. Again, it wasn't didn't turn out to be a major thing. It could have been, but I think that you get a lot of room. Also, if something else happens later, you get a lot of room if you handle it proactively every time it's around you, because it just happens. No, next question.
Douglas Carmichael has our last one in the queue. Have you experienced latency issues when using real-time production applications, like controlling a switcher over a VPN? Has that impeded productions that are latency sensitive?
Go ahead, Seth.
Generally, no, I haven't had too many issues with that. Where you will run into issues is if you're taking any video streams in or out, you'll want to make sure you're using a split tunnel VPN instead, because sending that video traffic over a VPN will definitely add latency.
And Rupert?
And again, if you're using these like monthly subscription hub and spoke VPNs that you're paying $5, $10, $15 for a month, probably yes. If you're using a robust point-to-point VPN, then probably much less likely to be a problem.
Okay, we've reached the top of the hour, and amazing. Like I have to admit that I wasn't sure when we put this in. It was a request. It was heavily voted, and I was like, it's a good conversation. I don't know how well or how many questions we're going to get about it. It turns out a lot of questions. so really well done by the producers as far as asking lots of great questions that kept the conversation going, let us run, and we ended up with a great panel that we've got some new folks that we don't see very often. Or I think, Seth, is this your first time joining?
For the most part, yeah. I've dropped in a couple of times, but long time lurker. First.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's good to see you there, and good to see Jason Panks. We haven't seen you recently, so it's very good.
Yeah, I get busy.
Yeah, no, all good. So and it's interesting. The second hour is I often look for whether, will we bring in some new people, some fresh faces, and so it's good to see all of you. So great work, and we'll either see many of you tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow is the long day. We've got education, we've got Unreal, we've got cooking, all kinds of things. So stay tuned for that, and we'll start.